Welcome to the War on Waste Academy. We'd like to tell you about what we really do to make you a more profitable company. And if you just take a minute to listen, I think we can show you a pretty good case as to why that's true. We start by asking the question, how can you make employees come together to come up with a 50-to-1 ROI on all projects? It's very simply, we get them to target projects of $100,000 of waste that they can fix for less than $2,000. We believe that this has been our success over the last 31 years, and we think it is pretty much critical to how we've been able to sell it not only to small companies where we expect a 50-to-1 return, but also to larger companies where we expect to see a 100-to-1 return on ideas. Over those 31 years, we've implemented about 10,000 ideas through completion with an average ROI of over 50-to-1. But the interesting thing about all of this is that by going about the projects the way we do, we help you create an enduring culture of innovation. And if you get 10 ideas completed, just stand back and watch, because that's what happens when you put 10 ideas into play in which the employees have had some significant hand in developing the process all the way through to completion. And if you let them go, the good things happen that we're going to be talking about. We put together teams of 5 employees, and we encourage remote engagement if somebody might be at a remote office or overseas. But we encourage that because the technology we've put together allows teams to be remote. The important thing of all of this is that during the war on waste, employees get earned respect. And we'll talk more about that a little bit. But the bottom line is when they invent, develop, and put together high-value, low-cost ideas, that's HVLC ideas, that they can get excited about being a participant in this culture of innovation we're talking about. It's an earned respect is what we call, goes 2 ways. It includes both respect from the manager down to the employees, and the employees acknowledging that they have respect for their management team that's running the organization. And it goes 2 ways, and that's what we'll talk about in a second. What made me believe about this process when I first started it up, in the very first company, it was really it was mind-boggling. We were talking about the war on waste, and I had thrown out a suggestion about what kinds of things could be considered ideas and for waste. And one of the employees, when I asked about any ideas they might have, one of the employees raised his hand. But before he offered his ideas, he turned to look in the back of the room to see who was there, because he didn't want to get in trouble for an idea that he put into play. So there was no one there, and he put his ideas into play, and that was great. So we trademarked no blame to allow employees that have an idea to put their idea into play, and it would lead to trade innovation without reprisal. In other words, change without reprisal was very important for employees early on, and it's true to this day. Another thing that made me believe was early on when I was standing up in front of this team, I'd been into about the 5th slide, and one of the employees raised her hand and she said, "How long did you say this was going to be?" And I said, "Well, it's planned to be 10 weeks, 3 days a week, so a total of 30 classes of an hour each. That's a total of 30 hours. And she goes, "Oh man, is this going to be boring?" Now, I could have just said tough and gone on, but I probed a little bit and found out, "What do you mean by you can't read?" She goes, "I'm illiterate." And I go, "Oh, that's something I hadn't anticipated." So I immediately changed the war on waste from being a lecture into an action kind of a thing. And it's morphed from that very first class, literally the very first class in the morning 31 years ago till today. And it's funny how that happened, but we started and we created teams, and we recognized early on that these weren't just teams. These were teams that were driving to make things happen. They were bugged by a problem in their organization and they were going to fix it. And so these people wanted to get earned respect, and by God, they did. They got the earned respect that they were looking for. This all came about, the earned respect concept came about when we were talking to a union official who told us that if people got respect, that's earned respect, that there would be no need for a union. And my business partner at the time, George Sibbald, and I were thinking about that. And it really boiled down to employees wanting to participate in improving the company, but they weren't going to do it just unilaterally. They wanted to get respect from the CEO, and in turn, the CEO would give them the respect they needed. So this earned respect concept is really what got me to become a believer, and that when employees bought into that there really was such a thing in this company as earned respect. When they put an idea into play and it gets all the way through to implementation and support from the CEO and the other management team, then that's a pretty exciting moment in a company and the employee's life. And that's what we think is the key component of an innovation culture. Let's talk briefly about some of the myths that we've broken. My people are too stubborn, some CEOs said. They're not going to contribute. They may be, but probably not. We have not seen a stubborn person who couldn't be brought over to the good side by members of his team. Usually they'll drag their feet, kicking and screaming, but when they'll sit back, fold their arms, and not participate until they see this really is going to happen and it's really a fun thing. So they've all got on board. I just don't remember one who didn't come on board. We also have managers say that project teams disrupt management, and one client in particular, the owner of the company, was arguing that he had a problem with that, and then we said, well, if you tell them this is not going to be a disruption, it's going to be a positive contribution to the business, and you get on board, it won't be a disruption, trust me. He said, another CEO said, in fact, quite a few said, I can't afford to let my people off work to go work on the war on waste. And I said, it's not true. In fact, just the first day or two of having the war on waste in play, people would see improvements in the way people were getting their jobs done, and it was extremely efficient. And that was attributed to the fact that people never thought about it before. They never thought that they were wasting their time when they could pick up their toolbox, go to their bench on the way into their desk, rather than go to the bench and go back and get it and come back. But one client made me a bet that they would cost more money to do the war on waste by just measuring overtime before the war on waste and afterwards. And it turned out he lost. And he lost a nice big check that he wrote me. Our program gives people earned respect, and boy, that pays off big to a client. When they come to class, they're there to work, and when they go to the teams in the internet war on waste, IWOW, boy, they get engaged and they really want to get the job done. Another CEO complained, our problems are too big, and your little teams of working on these projects won't be able to get their hands around them. And I said, well, that's exactly what we teach people, is that, put it this way, if you know anyone in an organization, if you know a group of people that know everything about a problem, I want to know who those people are, because that's just not going to happen. You take any problem and you put people together, there's no group of people that will know everything about that problem. It's just not going to happen. So we teach people the concept of 567 thinking. 5% of the problem can address 67% of the issue or the benefit that you're trying to target. And lo and behold, when you teach people that kind of thinking, good things happen. So you take a bite out of the elephant and watch what happens. And the other complaint that we've had is that my people aren't capable of solving problems. They're just they're just workers, but the problem is with that kind of thinking is that you're telling yourself that you hired these people and you don't think they're smart enough to solve a problem, but you're giving them a job to create value for you at the end of the day. And if you believe that, you ought to just sort of rethink what you're doing. But it turns out that literally every CEO that raised that issue almost turned around and said, yeah, I guess that is sort of stupid for me to say that. So what is WOW? What is it that we're doing with eWOW? Well, it's a systematic way to deliver the war on waste over the internet. We bring the same kind of group of people together that we did in the classroom. We bring them together over the internet, and we get them to solve problems. We look at both top-line problems and bottom-line problems, and we look at the inefficient processes in those things. I mean, we focus on the process. In other words, we don't need to know your specific kind of a business. In fact, quite a few times I'd walk into a business I knew nothing about. One case in particular, I had a DNA company that wanted me to help them improve the process of how they created oligos, which are segments of DNA. I didn't know anything about that, but we were able to go in there and improve the process by getting one of the employees to put an idea he had into play and made the company a lot of money. In fact, 5 times what they were making before. We just look at those inefficient processes and fix them. And when you fix one set of problems, another bunch pop up, and you just keep doing this process, and that's what the war on waste is about. How do we do it? In this particular case, we have a team consisting of people in Paris, Dallas, a finance person in Dallas, an operations person, a quality person in Antwerp, and a person in Kuala Lumpur in the factory. And they work through the war on waste, which is a 6-step, 6-phase process that consists of identifying the waste. That's step 1. Step 2 is finding the root cause. Step 3 is looking for the size of the waste. How much waste does this generate over the course of a year? 4th step is identifying its solution and its cost. And then the 5th is doing the implementation plan and the presentation of that plan to the CEO and champion. And then finally, we have the implementation of the process. That's step 6. And we manage step 6 over the course of a year because we want to know how we're doing in reclaiming the value that we've lost from the waste that you've identified. In one specific set of examples, we had 23 companies where we did the war on waste, and we had 371 projects implemented at these 23 companies, and our average ROI was $1,983, or average cost was $1,983, which was less than $2,000. But our ROI was only 38 to 1, not 50 to 1. But it turns out that's okay. We didn't achieve our goal of 50 to 1, but we got 38 to 1, and I think I'll take that. In fact, most CEOs would take that. Okay, what do we mean by value added? Well, basically, what we mean by that is basically extracting our term from Henry Ford, who said that value added is what the customers are willing to pay for, and waste is everything else. We took this report out of the Gore report, or this definition. In the public sector, value added is what the taxpayers expect from their government to deliver. And that was in 1993 from the Gore report. Waste is anything that doesn't add value to a company's products and services. That's directly from Taiichi Ohno. Taiichi Ohno was the founder of the Toyota production system, and it's the basis upon which this whole presentation is based. We've identified 3 activities of an organization. Of course, you have waste and value-added things, but we identified another category called essential support, and this was sort of one of our early things that we identified that sort of separated us from everyone else. And then initially, when I called that necessary waste or essential support are the components of business operations that support the adding of value. So they're not doing value-added functions, but they're doing functions that support it, like ordering materials is not a value-added function. Writing payroll checks, that's not a value-added function, but it's necessary, and so forth. So there's a whole category of work at a business that we call essential support. Early on, I was calling these people necessary waste, but one time a very large accountant came up and encouraged me to change the term. So how does this work? How does this whole process work? We look for high-value, low-cost ideas, which we call HVLCs. We look for $100,000 of annual waste that we can fix for less than $2,000, hence the 50 to 1. We really like 100 to 1 ROI targets in big companies, big ideas, because big companies with the big ideas have just more waste, and it's easier to find 100 to 1, and we force them to stretch their thinking a little bit. The interesting thing on this is that one of the focuses on process leads to a measure of how well you're doing in implementing your strategy, because the war on waste is looking at what you're doing to keep from adding value, and strategy is basically your statement of how you're going to add value. So the war on waste and strategy bump into each other and measure the efficacy of the strategy. So we use the war on waste process to look at those wastes, fix them, and then make sure they don't come back, or if they come back and morphed into a different problem, we fix that one too. Sort of the key concepts we have here is no blame. That was early on, we realized no blame is important to this whole process. And that led to change without reprisal. In order to get good ideas, you need to protect the people that put the idea into play. We use the scientific paradigm a lot in this process because both Craig and I have a lot of experience in scientists, basically. And we bring those scientific analogies to business because it helps people translate issues to terms they may understand better. We believe very strongly in the 5-67 rule. It's the idea, again, of 5% of the effort gets you 67% of the possible benefit. And what it does is avoids costly and expensive solutions. And what we're really trying to understand, how do you get things moving quickly? Well, you don't spend $5 million on a project to get things moving quickly. You spend $5,000 and see where that gets you. And then if you have to spend more money, you end up spending the money buying a big piece of equipment to solve a problem. But first of all, you need to automate. You first need to get rid of the waste. The process, again, is phase one is identify the problem. That's the waste. Identify the opportunity. Determine the root cause, then calculate the high value. That's the benefit. What is this thing costing the company? And then the recommended solution and the cost of your solution. And again, we're looking for 50 to 1. So if you spend $4,000 and you get $4 million benefit, we're not arguing something like that. Then you put your implementation plan together and you present it to the CEO or the champion for your project. Some ideas that we would like to go over with you is we had this oligo company that we talked about that one of the employees came up to me on the second day of class and said, I have an idea and I want to put it into play, but I'm worried about the CEO mucking it all up. So he said, can you help me there? And he said, and I also need to spend $3,500 to prove my idea by buying a small gantry robot that would help me test that. So we went to the president. It was a young guy, just got out of Harvard. We put the idea into play, and when they they actually got it to the point where they did a demonstration in 4 weeks. They put the idea into play, and it blew the president off. And he asked me, so how come you didn't tell me about this? You told me about all the other ones. And I said, well, he said, oh, asked and answered. So anyway, he knew who he was, and he appreciated the guy getting this project done, and he wasn't involved in the detail, but he appreciated it enough to cash his $40 million check later on. So when they were sold, the company was sold 10 months after we did the War on Waste. Another one was improving a surgery operation is 137 to 1, and it may, depending on how you look at it, is probably bigger than that as well. But this particular hospital was planning on doing a surgery process, building a new surgery wing, and they brought us in to sort of help them think through the process. So I created War on Waste projects to look at different aspects. And these teams that we put together identified that maybe we didn't need to build a wing. It turned out that the process, one of the teams looked at the turnaround time between surgeries. It was, 2 hours between surgeries. And, some of the surgeries might generate $5,000 an hour. And if you're spending $10,000 to clean up a room that you could probably do in 15 minutes, that was a big waste. So we did that, and lo and behold, we figured out not only how we could clean the room in 15 minutes, but we could do it by putting a tiger team of 5 people rather than 1 person. And the concept of a tiger team was interesting because it had been presented over and over again, but no one in the hospital had thought about the cost of keeping the surgery room not available. In other words, if they could clean it up in 15 minutes, you'd only be, instead of losing $5,000 for the hour of surgery you lost, or $10,000, you would only lose a quarter of $5,000 or $1,250. So when you added that up over the whole year, it was a big number. You weren't going to get rid of all the waste because there was a setup time, but you were going to get rid of most of it. And we put the tiger team together because the surgeons were in charge of deciding how many people they were going to have in that position, and they were never thinking of it in terms of, they weren't going to put 5 people in the room standing around waiting at $12 an hour with benefits maybe $25 an hour, and have them sitting around waiting for the next surgery room to come available. And when they thought about it in terms of how much money they were losing, they realized, oh, wow. So they ended up not spending the money to build a new wing. Bottom line is, thank you very much for taking the time. We really hope you'll spend the time to find out more about the War on Waste and maybe bring it to your business. But if you have any questions, you can call either Craig or I at the numbers listed here, both my phone number and my email, as well as Craig's email and phone number. Thank you very, very much.